January 1st, 1945. The time was 9 a.m. The location was a muddy, frozen patch of Belgian farmland designated by the US Army Air Forces as Airfield Y-29. To the locals in the nearby town of Ash, it was just a strip of pierced steel planking laid over the snow. To the pilots of the 352nd Fighter Group, known as the Blue-Nosed Bastards of Bodny, it was the tip of the spear. They were situated less than 20 miles from the German lines. They were so close to the Battle of the Bulge that on quiet nights, they could hear the distant thump of King Tiger tanks repositioning in the Ardennes. Among the pilots shivering in the briefing tent that morning was a 21-year-old lieutenant named Alden Rigby. Rigby didn't look like a killer. He was a devout Mormon farm boy from Utah. He had a baby face, a soft voice, and a demeanor that suggested he should be leading a Sunday school choir, not wrestling a 1,600 horsepower P-51 Mustang through the skies of Europe. The older ground crews sometimes looked at him and shook their heads. He was too polite, too quiet. In a squadron full of hard-drinking, poker-playing aces, Rigby was the kid who drank milk. They said he was too young to be this close to the Wehrmacht. They said the Frontline would chew him up. But on this freezing New Year's morning, Alden Rigby was about to prove that age has nothing to do with instinct. If you enjoy true stories of aviation history, the kind that don't always make it into the textbooks, do me a favor and hit that like button. It helps us defeat the algorithm and keep these memories alive. And drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and if anyone in your family served in the Battle of the Bulge. We want to honor them. Now, let's go back to 1945. The atmosphere at Y-29 was heavy. The night before New Year's Eve had been a raucous affair for most of the base. Alcohol had flowed freely. The pilots had celebrated surviving 1944, but Rigby had turned in early. He didn't drink. He was fresh, alert, and watching the mechanics chip ice off the wings of his Mustang. The mission briefing that morning was standard. Lieutenant Colonel J.C. Mayer, one of the top aces in the European theater, stood at the front of the tent. He was a legend, aggressive, brilliant, and suspicious. "The weather is perfect," Mayer told them. "Blue skies, cold air, unlimited visibility." This was bad news. For weeks, the Germans had been using the thick winter fog to hide their armored movements. Now that the sky was clear, the Luftwaffe would be up. Mayer felt it in his gut. He had a premonition that the Germans were planning something big to support their ground offensive. "I want a 12-ship patrol up immediately," Mayer ordered. "I don't trust this quiet." Rigby walked out to his plane. It was a P-51D Mustang, the definitive American fighter of the war. It was polished aluminum, gleaming in the winter sun, with a nose painted a brilliant azure blue. The P-51 was a masterpiece of aerodynamics, fast, long-ranged, and armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns that could saw a German fighter in half. But as Rigby climbed into the cockpit and strapped in, the P-51 wasn't a weapon of dominance. It was a freezer. The metal was so cold it burned exposed skin. The cockpit smelled of high-octane fuel, hydraulic fluid, and the leather of his flight jacket. He began his pre-flight checks. Mixture rich, propeller full forward, magnetos on. The Packard V1650 Merlin engine coughed, spat smoke, and roared to life. The vibration shook Rigby's teeth. He looked over at his wingman. He looked at the other 11 Mustangs taxiing toward the end of the steel runway. They had no idea that they were taxiing into a trap. Across the lines, the Luftwaffe had launched Operation Bodenplatte baseplate. It was Hitler's last great gamble in the air. He had secretly amassed over 900 fighters, Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, and even the terrifying new Me-262 jets. Their mission was simple: fly at treetop level, under the radar, and destroy the Allied air forces on the ground while the pilots were nursing their New Year's hangovers. As Rigby taxied his Mustang to the runway threshold, a massive formation of Focke-Wulf 190s was skimming the treetops just a few miles east, heading directly for Y-29. They were coming in fast, heavy, and looking for blood. Rigby checked his gun sight. He checked his fuel gauges. He was 21 years old. He had written a letter to his parents in Utah the night before, just in case. He didn't know that in less than 10 minutes, he would be the only thing standing between his squadron and total annihilation. Colonel Mayer was in the lead plane. He was already at the end of the runway, revving his engine for takeoff. Suddenly, the radio crackled. It wasn't the tower. It was a frantic voice from the anti-aircraft pits surrounding the airfield. "Bandits, bandits, 3 o'clock low." Rigby looked right. At first, it looked like a flock of dark birds rising from the forest edge. Then the birds grew wings. Then they grew propellers. Then the tracers started snapping past the canopy. Scores of German fighters were popping up over the tree line, banking hard toward the airfield. They had caught the Americans in the worst possible position, on the ground, lined up with full fuel tanks. A sitting duck doesn't begin to describe it. It was a shooting gallery. Most pilots would have frozen. Most would have shut down the engine and bilayed out into a ditch. You don't take off into an attack. You don't fly straight into a wall of incoming 20 cannon fire. Physics and survival instinct say you stay on the ground. But Alden Rigby didn't cut his engine. He slammed the throttle forward. The boy from Utah, the quiet kid who drank milk, made a split-second decision that would become legend. He wasn't going to wait to be strafed. He was going to take the fight into the teeth of the ambush. His Mustang surged forward, picking up speed over the clattering steel planks. Tracers from the German planes were chewing up the dirt on either side of the runway. Flak from the American gunners, who were now firing wildly at the low-flying Germans, was exploding overhead. It was total chaos. Friendly fire, enemy fire, and 12 Mustangs trying to claw their way into the sky before they burned. Rigby pulled back on the stick. The landing gear hadn't even retracted when he saw the first Focke-Wulf 190 fill his windscreen. The kid was up, and the Germans had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were attacking a sleeping airfield. They didn't know they had just kicked a hornet's nest. The wheels of the Mustang were still spinning from the runway tarmac when the war arrived. Alden Rigby didn't have speed. He didn't have altitude. In the unforgiving physics of aerial combat, these are the two things a pilot needs to survive. Without them, you are a brick with wings. Rigby's P-51D was heavy with fuel, sluggish, and clawing for lift as the hydraulic system whined, slowly retracting the landing gear into the wings. Directly in front of him, filling the windscreen, was the chaotic geometry of hell. The sky over Ash wasn't just full of planes. It was a confused tapestry of tracers. The American anti-aircraft gunners, caught completely by surprise, were firing at anything that moved. They were shooting at the Germans, and in their panic they were shooting at Rigby. Rigby banked the Mustang hard to the left, barely clearing the tree line. His wingtip missed the pine branches by feet. As he turned, he saw the enemy clearly for the first time. They weren't just a few raiders. It was a swarm. Jagdgeschwader 11, one of the Luftwaffe's premier fighter wings, had arrived with over 50 aircraft. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s were diving on the airfield, strafing the parked B-17s and C-47s, tearing up the tents Rigby had just walked out of. He was inside the kill zone. Most rookie pilots in this situation would experience what instructors call vapor lock, a mental paralysis caused by sensory overload. Rigby didn't freeze. The Sunday school teacher vanished, replaced instantly by a cold, calculating machine. He spotted a Bf-109G. The German pilot was fixated on strafing a parked C-47 transport on the ground. He was flying low, straight, and fast. He didn't see the silver Mustang struggling for altitude behind him. Rigby shoved the throttle past the gate into war emergency power. The Merlin engine screamed, the manifold pressure gauge climbing into the red. He didn't have time to set up a proper gunnery solution. He didn't have time to check his six. He pulled the nose up, forcing the heavy Mustang to hang on its prop. At 300 yards, Rigby squeezed the trigger. The 6.50 caliber machine guns in the wings erupted. The vibration shuddered through the airframe, rattling Rigby's bones. He walked the tracers into the Messerschmitt. The effect was instantaneous. The .50 caliber round is a wrecking ball. It doesn't just poke holes, it tears metal apart. Rigby's burst sawed through the Bf-109's wing root. The German fighter snapped violently to the right, shrouded in a sudden cloud of debris and coolant vapor, and slammed into the Belgian farmland. 1 kill, elapsed time since takeoff, less than 45 seconds. Rigby didn't watch the crash. Rule number 1 of a dogfight: if you stare at your kill, you become someone else's. He yanked the stick back, trying to trade his airspeed for altitude. He needed to get above the fight. Brake right, brake right. The radio was a mess of screaming voices. Lieutenant Colonel Mayer was up there somewhere, directing the chaos, but Rigby was fighting his own private war in a box of airspace less than 2 miles wide. As he climbed, he saw a Focke-Wulf 190 coming head-on. The FW-190 was a butcher. It had 4 20mm cannons in the nose and wings. A single hit from a 20mm shell could blow the tail off a Mustang. The two planes were closing at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. This was a game of chicken played with high explosives. The German pilot fired. Rigby saw the golf ball-sized flashes of the cannon shells zipping past his canopy. He didn't flinch. He held his line, waiting for the split second where the geometry was perfect. He fired. The burst caught the FW-190 in the nose. The radial engine absorbed the impact, but the cowling flew off. The German pilot panicked. He yanked his stick hard, diving away to the left to escape the madman coming straight at him. Rigby rolled the Mustang inverted and dove after him. This was the split-S maneuver, a classic way to change direction and gain speed, but doing it at 500 feet is suicide. If you miscalculate, you don't pull out. You smear yourself across the landscape. Rigby pulled. The G-forces hit him like a physical blow, draining the blood from his head, narrowing his vision to a tunnel. The ground rushed up: mud, snow, fences. He eased the stick back, feeling the Mustang shudder as it leveled out just above the grass. He was right behind the Focke-Wulf. The German pilot was twisting and turning, trying to shake him. He was good. He was a veteran, but Rigby was in the zone. He matched every turn, every jink. He was flying the P-51 by feel, listening to the airflow over the wings, sensing the edge of the stall. The FW-190 pulled up, trying to loop. A mistake. He bled off his energy. For a second he hung in the air, a slow, fat target. Rigby poured a 2-second burst into the fuselage. The German plane disintegrated. It didn't burn. It just ceased to be an airplane and became a collection of falling parts. 2 kills. Rigby checked his fuel. He checked his ammo. He was breathing hard, sweating in the freezing cockpit. His hands were gripping the flight controls so hard his knuckles were white. He looked around. The sky was still full of bandits. The 352nd had managed to get only a handful of planes airborne, maybe 10 or 12 Mustangs against 50 Germans. It was a barroom brawl. To his left, he saw a Mustang trailing smoke. To his right, a P-47 Thunderbolt from a neighboring squadron was burning on the runway. The air smelled of cordite and burning oil, a stench that managed to penetrate his oxygen mask. Rigby spotted a third target, another Bf-109. This one was chasing a P-51, trying to get a lock on its tail. The American pilot in front was desperate, banking left and right, screaming for help. Rigby was the help. He banked hard, cutting across the circle. He was coming in from a high deflection angle. It was a difficult shot. He had to lead the target significantly, firing into empty space where he hoped the German plane would be in half a second. He pressed the trigger. The guns roared. The tracers arced through the sky and intersected perfectly with the Bf-109's engine. The German plane pitched up violently, stalled, and then nosed over, plummeting straight down. 3 kills. The timeline was compressing. It had been perhaps 3 or 4 minutes since his wheels left the ground. Alden Rigby, the quiet kid from Utah, had just become an ace in a day -2. But the math didn't matter. Survival mattered. He pulled up again, scanning the horizon. The fight was drifting away from the airfield now, spreading out over the town of Ash. The German formation was breaking up. They had expected easy prey. They had found a pack of wolves. But the danger wasn't over. As Rigby leveled off, a shadow fell over his cockpit. He looked up. A Focke-Wulf 190 was diving on him from the 12 o'clock high position. The German had the altitude. He had the speed. He had the initiative. Rigby was low on energy. He was low on ammo. And for the first time in the fight, he was the target. He saw the muzzle flashes of the German cannons. He heard the terrifying thump-thump-thump of rounds impacting his own fuselage. The Mustang shuddered. Rigby didn't have time to think. He only had time to react. And the move he made next would defy every manual ever written on aerial combat. The sound of a bullet striking an airplane in flight is not a ping or a clang. It is a dull, sickening thud, like a sledgehammer hitting a side of beef. It is the sound of structural integrity failing. Alden Rigby heard that sound 3 times in rapid succession. The Focke-Wulf 190 diving on him had drawn blood. The German shells had stitched a line of holes across Rigby's right wing and punched through the fuselage behind his armor plate. If the aim had been 6 inches to the left, the rounds would have severed the control cables or ignited the main fuel tank behind Rigby's seat, turning him into a fireball over the Belgian snow. Rigby didn't freeze. He didn't check the damage. He reacted with the desperate violence of a trapped animal. He slammed the left rudder pedal to the floor and racked the stick hard over. The Mustang didn't turn. It skidded. It was a violent, uncoordinated maneuver that threw the aircraft sideways through the air, ruining its aerodynamics but also ruining the German pilot's aim. The stream of 20 cannon shells that was meant to finish him slashed through the empty air, where his cockpit had been a fraction of a second earlier. The Focke-Wulf, carrying too much speed from its dive, couldn't adjust. The German pilot zoomed past Rigby, missing him by less than 50 feet. Rigby saw the gray camouflage, the black cross, and the distinct shimmer of heat from the enemy's exhaust. Now the tables were turned. The hunter had overshot. Rigby wrestled the Mustang back to level flight. The aircraft felt sloppy. The holes in the wing were disrupting the airflow, and the vibration from the engine seemed louder, angrier. But the engine was still running. The guns were still armed. He hauled the nose around, looking for the German who had just tried to kill him. But the sky over Ash had become a kaleidoscope of confusion. The Focke-Wulf had disappeared into the haze of battle, lost among the dozens of other dogfights raging from the deck to 2,000 feet. Rigby checked his clock. It had been 5 minutes since takeoff. 5 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. It felt like 5 seconds. He was alone in a sector of sky that was rapidly emptying. The German element of surprise had evaporated. The American Mustangs, now fully airborne and aggressive, were tearing into the Luftwaffe formation. The German pilots, many of whom were inexperienced teenagers thrown into battle with barely enough flight hours to taxi, were panicking. They had come to strafe parked planes. They hadn't expected the blue-nosed bastards to come up and meet them. Rigby could have turned back. He had 3 kills. His plane was damaged. He was low on ammo. No one would have faulted him for landing. But Alden Rigby wasn't done. He scanned the sector towards the town of Opklabeek. There, low over the rooftops, he spotted a Messerschmitt Bf 109. The German pilot was trying to disengage, banking hard to head back toward the safety of the German lines. He was running. Rigby pushed the throttle. The Merlin engine, despite the abuse it had taken, responded. The Mustang surged forward, eating up the distance. This was the deadliest phase of the fight. The German pilot knew he was in trouble. He was flying erratically, jinking left and right, staying low to the trees to make himself a difficult target. Rigby closed to 400 yards. He checked his gun sight. The gyro was trembling. He had to trust his eyes. 300 yards. The German pilot pulled a hard left turn, trying to drag Rigby over a line of German flak batteries that were positioned near the front. If Rigby followed him too far, he would be flying into a wall of 88 anti-aircraft fire. Rigby knew the trap. He didn't bite. Instead of following the turn directly, he pulled up, converting his speed into altitude. He performed a high yo-yo, climbing above the turning German, cutting across the circle, and then dropping back down on the inside of the turn. It was a maneuver of pure geometry. When Rigby came back down, he wasn't behind the Bf 109. He was inside its turn radius, leading it perfectly. He squeezed the trigger. Click. The guns on the left wing were empty. He had burned through his ammunition faster than he realized. Rigby didn't panic. He still had the guns in the right wing. But the asymmetrical recoil would yaw the plane, throwing off his aim if he wasn't careful. He had to compensate with a rudder. He adjusted his feet. He lined up the shot again, 200 yards. He pressed the trigger again. The 3 remaining .50 calibers roared. The tracers lashed out, seeking the Messerschmitt. The first few rounds hit the tail, shredding the elevator. The German plane bucked. Rigby corrected his aim, walking the fire forward along the fuselage. The rounds found the engine. There was no explosion this time, no fireball. The Bf 109 simply died. The propeller stopped spinning, seizing up instantly. A thick trail of black oil coated the German's canopy. The plane lost all lift, rolled onto its back and smashed into a frozen plowed field just outside the town. 4 kills. Rigby pulled up, gasping for air. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His arms were trembling from the physical exertion of horsing the heavy fighter through high-G maneuvers without hydraulic boost. He looked around. The sky was clearing. The surviving German planes were fleeing east, trailing smoke, running for their lives. The attack on Y-29 had been a disaster for the Luftwaffe. Instead of destroying the 352nd Fighter Group, they had lost dozens of aircraft. Rigby checked his fuel gauges. He was fine on gas. He checked his ammo. He was practically dry. He checked his plane. The holes in the wing were ugly, jagged tears in the aluminum skin. He keyed his radio. Y-29 Tower, this is Rigby coming in. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. It was flat, detached. The adrenaline dump was beginning. Clear to land, Rigby, the tower controller replied. The controller's voice was shaking. They had watched the whole thing. They had seen the kid take off into a swarm of 50 enemy fighters and carve a path through them. Rigby dropped his landing gear. He prayed the hydraulics hadn't been severed by the hit he took. Thump, 1 green light. Thump, 2 green lights. The gear was down and locked. He lined up on the steel plank runway. The smoke from the burning P-47 was still drifting across the threshold. Debris, pieces of German aluminum, shell casings, dirt littered the field. Rigby eased the throttle back. The Mustang settled. The wheels chirped against the steel. He held the stick back, keeping the tail down, letting the aerodynamic drag slow him. He taxied off the active runway and killed the engine. The propeller spun down and stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the noise of the battle. For the first time in 6 minutes, there was no engine roar, no gunfire, no screaming radio. Just the wind whistling over the cockpit and the ticking of the cooling metal. Rigby sat there for a long moment. He couldn't unbuckle his harness. His fingers wouldn't work. They were locked into claws from gripping the stick. His crew chief jumped up onto the wing. The man's face was pale. He looked at the holes in the wing. He looked at the empty gun ports, stained black with powder burns. Then he looked at Rigby. "Lieutenant," the chief asked softly, "you okay?" Rigby took a deep breath of the cold winter air. He nodded slowly. "I think so." He finally managed to undo the buckles. He climbed out of the cockpit, his legs feeling like jelly. He slid off the wing and his boots hit the frozen mud. A jeep pulled up. It was Colonel Mayer. The squadron commander jumped out, still wearing his flight gear. He had seen the last kill. He had seen Rigby chase the 109 into the ground. Mayer walked up to the 21-year-old. He looked at the damage to the plane. He looked at the baby-faced kid who had just dismantled 4 veterans of the Luftwaffe in less time than it takes to boil an egg. "Rigby," Mayer said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I thought I told you to fly a patrol, not win the damn war by yourself." Rigby managed a weak smile. "Just trying to keep them off the runway, sir." But the celebration was short-lived. As the adrenaline faded, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They walked around the aircraft. The crew chief started counting the bullet holes. 1, 2, 3. The chief pointed to a jagged hole near the tail. "Lieutenant, look at this." Rigby looked. A 20 explosive shell had hit the horizontal stabilizer. It had passed through the aluminum skin but hadn't detonated. If the fuse had worked, the entire tail section would have been blown off. Rigby would be dead in a crater a few miles back. He stared at the hole. He touched the jagged metal. It was cold. Chance, luck, providence. Whatever you wanted to call it, Alden Rigby had used up a lifetime supply in 6 minutes. But as the pilots gathered in the debriefing hut, counting their victories, the 352nd claimed 23 kills that morning without losing a single pilot in the air. The mood shifted from euphoria to something darker. Rigby sat with a cup of coffee, his hands finally still. He listened to the other pilots describing the chaos, but his mind was back in the cockpit, replaying the split-second decisions, the flash of the cannon shells, the oil on the canopy. He had proven them wrong. He wasn't too young. He wasn't too soft. He was a fighter ace. But the war wasn't over. The Battle of the Bulge was still raging, and tomorrow the weather was forecast to be clear again. As Rigby looked at the map on the wall, marked with the fluid frontlines of the Ardennes, he realized that surviving one miracle didn't guarantee another. The legend of Y-29 was born, but for the men who flew it, the legend was just a terrifying Tuesday morning. And the history books were about to record just how close the 352nd had come to disaster. The debriefing room at Y-29 smelled of stale cigarette smoke, nervous sweat, and aggressive optimism. Intelligence officers were scrambling to make sense of the reports coming in from the pilots. The chalkboard at the front of the room was becoming a tally of destruction. "Rigby," the intelligence officer asked, his pen hovering over the paper. "Confirm your claim, 4 aircraft." Alden Rigby sat on a wooden bench, a mug of coffee warming his hands. He looked up. "Yes, sir. 2 109s, 2 190s. The room went quiet for a beat. 4 kills in a single sortie was rare. 4 kills in a single sortie that lasted less than 10 minutes while taking off under fire was statistically absurd. In the rigid bureaucracy of the Army Air Forces, claims had to be verified. Pilots often overclaimed in the heat of battle. 2 pilots might shoot at the same plane and both claim it, or a plane might smoke but not crash. "We'll need the film," the officer said. The gun camera footage was the ultimate arbiter of truth. Every time Rigby had pulled the trigger, a small camera in the wing of his Mustang had rolled. Later that afternoon, the film was developed. The grainy black and white footage flickered onto the screen. There was no sound, but the violence was undeniable. Clip 1. A Bf-109 fills the frame. Tracers sparkle on its wing root. Pieces fly off. It rolls over. Clip 2. A FW-190 in a turn. The bullets strike the cowling. The canopy flies off. Clip 3. The diving attack. The 109 smoked, pitching down, hitting the ground in a cloud of debris. The film didn't lie. Alden Rigby hadn't exaggerated. If anything, he had downplayed the intensity of the dogfights. The officers watching the film saw a pilot who flew with a terrifying economy of motion. No wasted shots. No hesitation. Just target, fire, kill, next. The final tally for the 352nd Fighter Group on January 1, 1945, was staggering. They claimed 23 German fighters were destroyed. They hadn't lost a single pilot in the air. It was one of the most lopsided victories in the history of aerial warfare. They called it the legend of Y-29. But the victory at Asch was just one piece of a larger tragedy for the Luftwaffe. Operation Bodenplatte was intended to be a knockout blow against Allied air power. In total, the Germans destroyed about 300 Allied aircraft, mostly on the ground. But the cost was catastrophic. The Luftwaffe lost over 200 pilots that morning. These weren't just rookies. They were expert and squadron leaders, veterans with hundreds of missions, the backbone of the German fighter force. They were irreplaceable. When Rigby shot down those 4 planes, he wasn't just reducing the enemy count. He was helping to break the spine of the German Air Force. After January 1st, the Luftwaffe never mounted a major offensive again. For his actions that morning, Lieutenant Alden Rigby was awarded the Silver Star. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism and aggressive leadership. But medals are just metal. The reality was that a 21-year-old farm boy had faced the apocalypse and didn't blink. Rigby finished the war with 5 confirmed aerial victories, making him an official ace. He flew more missions, escorted more bombers, and strafed more trains. But he never saw a day like New Year's Day 1945 again. Few pilots ever did. When the war in Europe ended in May 1945, the noise stopped. The P-51s were parked. The roar of the Merlin engines faded. Alden Rigby, the killer of the skies, did something that is perhaps harder than fighting a war. He went back to normal life. He returned to Utah. He didn't become a barnstormer or a Hollywood consultant. He didn't trade on his fame. He was a quiet, religious man. He went to college. He got married. He raised a family. He built a career in government service and the Air National Guard. For decades, the neighbors in his quiet suburban street had no idea that the gentle man who mowed his lawn on Saturdays had once fought a duel with 50 Nazis over a frozen field in Belgium. It wasn't until years later, when historians began to dig into the records of the blue-nosed bastards, that Rigby's story resurfaced. Aviation enthusiasts watched the gun camera footage. They analyzed the flight data. They realized that Rigby's performance at Y-29 was a masterclass in energy management and situational awareness. In interviews given late in his life, Rigby remained characteristically humble. When asked about the ace in a day label, which he narrowly missed by 1 kill, though some historians argue a 5th probable kill that day should have counted, he would shrug. "I was just busy," he would say with a faint smile. "I didn't have time to be scared until it was over." He emphasized the team. He talked about the crew chiefs who kept the planes running in sub-zero temperatures. He talked about Colonel Mayer's leadership. He talked about the pilots who didn't come back. Alden Rigby passed away on May 30, 2015, at the age of 92. He died peacefully, surrounded by family, a world away from the violence of 1945. But the legacy of Y-29 remains. It stands as a testament to a specific moment in history when the outcome of a battle depended entirely on the reflexes of a handful of young men. There were no drones, no guided missiles, no beyond visual range radar locks. There was just a stick, a throttle, and the human eye. The Germans had bet everything on catching the Americans sleeping. They had the numbers, they had a surprise, they had the machines. But they forgot one variable. They forgot that you can't measure the heart of a pilot by his age. They looked at Alden Rigby and saw a 21-year-old kid who should have been too scared to take off. They didn't realize they were looking at a buzzsaw until it was too late. The story of Alden Rigby is a reminder that when the alarm sounds and the odds are stacked against you, the only way out is through. You don't wait for permission. You don't wait for the perfect conditions. You throttle up, you lift off, and you fight. Because sometimes, 6 minutes is all it takes to change the course of history. If you made it to the end of this story, you're the kind of person who helps keep these memories alive. The algorithm tends to bury history, but your engagement brings it back to the surface. So please, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We have hundreds of stories like Alden Rigby's waiting to be told, stories of courage, mechanics, and the human spirit under fire. And one last request. Scroll down to the comments and leave the name of a veteran you want to remember. It doesn't have to be a fighter ace. It could be a mechanic, a cook, a nurse, or an infantryman. Let's build a memorial in the comments section right now. We read every single one. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, you have to check out the story of the 18-year-old P-51 cadet who misjudged a dive and invented a turn that killed 7 enemies. See you in the next one.